Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Friday edition of Video Clips. And just a couple of announcements. First of all, if you have not read my book, COVID Operation, the one I wrote with Shane Pryor, it is the best story, I think, compendium of what happened with lots of references. And some people are starting to become a little bit open-minded, and I've suggested, hey, just read the first 3 or 4 chapters of this book, and if it captivates you, read the rest of it. But I think it'll give you an idea, if you read the whole thing, particularly of what's really going on here. And I've had some very good feedback from people who are doing that too. There are many people waking up in view of all that's going on. Second thing is, remember, next Saturday is the research boot camp. It's the short version of a very long 8-month course I teach, which is for people who really want to get into research and learn how to write papers and develop slide presentations and that sort of thing. So really a great summary. And we're even going to do some exercises together, like you'll have your browser open and we'll do a little research together while we're in class, which I think should be helpful for you too. And then, of course, we have all kinds of classes coming up. Food allergies is next week. HIV/AIDS is the first weekend in March. So check our online calendar at WellnessForumHealth.com. And that's also where the forbidden videos are posted. And lots of other stuff to look at there too. So what I want to talk about tonight, or today rather, is based on last week's video. I posted one called What Can One Person Do? And in that video, in case you didn't see it, I shared, I think it was a pretty inspirational story about a woman in Europe who saved 400 Jewish children, and with some other colleagues managed to save over 2,500 children. And I got a lot of great feedback, people saying it's really nice when I can feel inspired and thank you for doing that. And people wrote to me and said, well, let me tell you what I'm doing to help people during this crisis. And all of that was very heartwarming. I think that people who are awake and know about the suffering are doing what they can. And I was also pleased that a whole lot of people said, you know, I want to be one person standing up with Make Americans Free Again. And we had a packed conference call yesterday when we were together at noon. And so there's a waking up and an interest in being involved that I think was increased quite a bit as a result of that video. So I want to continue the discussion today about making a difference, but from a different point of view. And I want to ask you this: what do you think 80 million people could do who would join together under one unifying idea, which is freedom from medical tyranny? And that's one of our goals at Make Americans Free Again, to gather tens of millions of people under the same tent that share a common goal. And I want to be crystal clear. We've expanded our mission statement a little bit. Some of you said it needed to be rewritten on the site, and I took that to heart, and we did that. This isn't just about vaccination. It's about medical care in general. I mean, the idea that people have to take psychiatric drugs to get welfare, and the idea that somebody could threaten to turn a parent over to Child Protective Services if the parent didn't do what a doctor wanted the parent to do. This is all medical tyranny, and it needs to go away. And I think that the people who are with us see this episode in history as, in the context of history, as just the biggest example of medical tyranny. So if we got 80 million people together to unite with that idea, just with that sole thing that we want to accomplish, that goal, what would happen? So we know one person can make a difference. We know one person with a small group of people can make a difference. But what about 80 million? Well, 80 million people who refuse to fly until masks are no longer required can force the airlines to change their policies. In fact, 80 million people with that as a criteria could be the basis for forming a whole new airline. 80 million people who cut up their membership card and return it to Costco in an envelope, I think that they would have to get rid of the mask Nazis at the door if that happened. 80 million people who on the same day decide to call their cell phone carriers and say, get this app off my phone, this tracing app off my phone, or I'm canceling my service, would make a big difference. In fact, if 80 million people said, we'll change to the company that takes that doesn't require that as part of their service, I'm sure we would find somebody that would accommodate us. 80 million people who decided on the same week to send just one letter to one person in Congress. I want you to picture what 80 million pieces of paper mail look like. It's kind of fun to think about because the hallways would be so filled with mail that they probably wouldn't be able to get to their offices or do any business, which might be the best thing ever for people, right? 80 million people can refuse to attend a conference or a concert that requires temperature checks or something like that. And that would change things pretty fast because that's a huge number of adults dropping out of the system for purchasing tickets. In fact, you could almost start a concert or conference business around people who don't want that nonsense, because 80 million people attending stuff is a pretty big number. 80 million people could withdraw their children from school on one day. Think of the impact. And basically say the nonsense is over or our kids aren't coming back. And in fact, what if we took it a step further and said, not only does the nonsense have to go away, but to get 80 million families to send their kids back to school, we want better lunches and we want a curriculum that makes sense to people who are middle-class Americans like us. 80 million people actually could be the basis for starting a healthcare company that offers the types of services we want, not sickness care and disease mongering, but actually services that lead to health. Here's another thing 80 million people can do. They can file lawsuits in every state and in every jurisdiction that is affected by this nonsense we're experiencing now. They can take these cases to the United States Supreme Court so that a legal framework can be established for what is an emergency, defining it, who can declare it, for how long, and with what kind of oversight. That's what 80 million people can do. And 80 million people doing that would mean that the legacy we would leave our children and grandchildren is a country where there is no medical tyranny, okay? So that's what I want to do. That's why I want to gather 80 million people. We can certainly accomplish the objective we're set to accomplish now with lawsuits, but look at all the other things 80 million people can do. And just think about what would have happened had I had the foresight to get 80 million people together in 2017 before all this nonsense started. We could have fixed it awfully quickly. So here's your invitation. Send an email to pampopper@msn.com if you want to be one of the 80 million. We have to accelerate this if we're going to get this done in time. Send an email to me if you want to join Make Americans Free Again and start advocating in your area so we can file lawsuits. Send an email to me if you're ready to join forces and change the world we live in a productive sort of way. All right, pampopper@msn.com, makeamericans.freeagain.com, WellnessForumHealth.com. Let's really, they talk about a great reset. How about a great reset? Just not the ones they talked about, the ones that the great reset that we define. Let's do it. We can do it. And the time is now. pampopper@msn.com. That's all for today. It's all for the week. And as usual, pass this on to anybody who you think might enjoy watching it. And I will be back to you next week with more news.